Hi, this is your host Sapna Bhartia and welcome to TFR Let's Talk. And today we have with us once again Rob Hirschfeld, CEO and co-founder of RackN. Rob, it's great to have you back on the show.
Swap, it is a pleasure as always. And a lot's going on, so there's fun things to talk about.
Today we are kind of continuing the series we have done on the whole VMware and Broadcom acquisition. And today we are going to talk about, that when we look at this whole development, what are you seeing in the market? Because we have spoken about it, that customers, they are looking at alternatives. But of course, we do talk about alternatives. Okay, the license change is happening. But in reality, when you deal with the customers, when you talk to your peers, competitors, how real is that, where people are looking at leaving or migrating away from VMware solutions?
It's really remarkable how quickly the market as a whole, and this is across our customer base, our prospects, conversations I have in general, has really made a decision that Broadcom is not a preferred vendor for them with VMware. That doesn't mean that people are going and deleting VMware. It's not that simple. That's why we put together this chart. But it's really remarkable how quickly people's opinions and assumptions about the future have changed. Some of that's based on very real price increases that they're seeing. Some of it's based on just simple concerns that people have about whether or not VMware is the partner that they want to look at. And yet, even though opinion has churned quite a bit, we're also watching customers take a very measured stance on this and work through what an actual VMware replacement is going to look like. So, it's very real, but it's not fast.
What are some of the most pressing concern? Is it just price, license, or they have additional concern regarding, what is VMware going to look like in future? Because the company has been a pioneer in a lot of technologies in its early days. So is it just the pricing license, or there are other concerns as well?
Both of them are definitely factors for this, because one of the ways that they're increasing the price is by bundling all of the products together. So part of the challenge is that even customers who aren't concerned about price are getting signals from VMware that they need to migrate to these consolidated products. So things that they were able to buy as individual licenses and consume as an individual product now require customers to buy an integrated license that includes a lot more pieces. I think Broadcom was hoping that would encourage people to use these bundled products together. But customers have not been as excited about the bundles as I think Broadcom was hoping they would be. And so they're really seeing it as a loss, and they're not as excited about single sourcing into VMware Broadcom. What's interesting, as they might have been before the merger was completed. We'd seen several customers getting excited, or at least talking about using SaltStack, which was acquired by VMware, and building that. And a lot of those conversations have dried up, where they're not looking to add more dependency on the VMware Broadcom suite.
Is it more or less about bundling their offering, or is there anything to do with the architecture as well when it comes to this whole, migrate away from VMware solutions and technologies?
That's an excellent question. And one of the challenges here is that architecture is probably the most critical word for people to consider when they look at a VMware migration or a virtualization platform choice. One of the things that made VMware really powerful and distinctive in market is the way the product and the platform was architected. So customers have gotten used to buying externalized storage, buying certain types of hardware, having a lot of choice in how they build those solutions together. And the alternatives that customers are looking at, if they're just looking to replace VMware with another virtualization platform, don't have the same flexibility in their architecture. So the architecture side of how you've deployed and managed and assumed your virtualization footprint would look is a factor for for customers to consider. And on the other side of it, application architectures and how people are building applications to consume VMware or containerized infrastructures also has a major component. And so customers actually have to really evaluate architecture, both from how they build their infrastructure to how they deploy applications and what assumptions the applications are making. It really is coming back to architectural choices at the end of the day.
When it comes to choices, of course, we talked about that earlier, but how ready are those choices for enterprise customers? How real are the alternatives there?
It's a great question. There's a couple of architectural patterns that enterprises know they should be following, but they haven't yet been embracing particularly much. And so they need to be thinking through how they're building and delivering applications in order to leverage some of these applications. And that's one of the things in this flowchart that we put together really highlights this idea that as you go down a path of more ephemeral, fast turnover, cloud-like behavior in your infrastructure, those patterns, which is an architectural choice, an architectural pattern, those actually give you a lot more flexibility and choice in what you deploy in the end. You're less likely to have to replace the full VMware feature set, and you might be able to choose a different platform, either a more containerized platform or a more virtualization only, like less networking, less storage, less HA capabilities inside of your platform. But to do that, enterprises have to make investments in CI/CD and image-based deployment tooling in how they run their infrastructure. It's a much more dynamic system than they might be used to building. And so those disciplines, that process control, adding those things into place are necessary for customers to look at that. Otherwise, if you're not willing to make those changes and you're just trying to replace VMware with a like system, your choices are going to be very limited. And what you're going to find is you're going to be very vulnerable to whatever that next system is when it comes in. If that vendor gets acquired and goes off market or something major changes.
What kind of, first of all, message that enterprise customer should take from it as they are building their strategy? And if you look at your chart here, the graphics here, which is a very nice flow, because if they are building, whether the architecture, their environment, their applications in a particular specific way, they may not have to worry too much about vendor lock-in or vendors moving in and out. What would be your approach, not only as creator of RackN, but let's also say enterprise customer yourself?
You're right to highlight the word lock-in here. One of the first things that we find makes our customers more successful is when they invest in a degree of abstraction that helps them be multi-vendor. And being multi-vendor requires more work, right? That's part of the technical debt. You have to have abstractions. You have to be a little bit more flexible. But the ability to pick and choose, move a little bit more towards a best of breed choice is a major benefit into these types of systems, and it has to be deliberate choice. For a long time, what I've seen in enterprise is they made VMware is a safe choice. It's going to be there. It's stable. And we threw VMware into situations when it wasn't necessarily the best choice or the most cost-effective choice, but because it was already there, we used it. That's a degree of technical debt where you've gone single vendor because it was easier to just keep replicating that pattern. What we're looking at here with the graph and what we're looking at as best practice for customers is helping them be multi-vendor so you can pick and choose the different platforms that make the most sense for the workloads. And the only way you could do that is if you build up some abstraction so you can change things out, but also patterns that allow you to use, a Nutanix when you're ready or swap over to a Proxmox, right? Mix and match these workloads. That's something you have to be doing on a regular basis. It's something you have to build into your organization. And understand that it's going to take a little bit more time and effort to maintain two platforms. Definitely, this is a place where RackN dramatically improves those outcomes for customers. And it also means that you have to make internal investments to have some expertise, to have more vendor relationships. And that's definitely a balance in how these pieces go. But that's what it takes to be multi-vendor. That's what it takes to have a great supply chain. And we should note here, this isn't simply a matter of, something dramatic like a vendor being taken out of market and changing their licensing and pricing all of a sudden. It could be about innovation. It could be about investment. It could be about architectural patterns. This is really helping your company innovate faster by being able to pick and choose how things go. That doesn't mean that you should just follow flavor of the day. All these things are deliberate. But it does mean that you can recognize that for some workloads, you could potentially look at something that was much more lightweight and cost effective for a certain type of flow. And, companies should be able to say yes to those types of opportunities and not run away from them.
And as folks are building this, multi kind of approach, does that mean that they have to fully exclude VMware-like technologies, or it's also about mix and match, building the right strategy, but the pieces more like modular or jigsaw puzzle that can be replaced, removed?
Yeah, I'm glad you're asking that, because I think this is one of the biggest mistakes I see people trying to make when they look at their VMware estate. Very few companies are going to be able to entirely replace or eliminate their VMware footprint. And setting yourself up to do that and committing to do that is actually potentially adding a lot of work into your needs that you might not need to do. What we see is companies should set a target to have a certain degree of VMware in their environment. And that could trend to zero, but it should be an annual goal to go from 100% to 80% to 60% to 40%, and have a mix with this. And so instead of looking at it as I need to replace all VMware, what we really need to be doing is how do you create a more multi-vendor, more abstracted environment that has more flexibility into it? And that is actually a much more straightforward approach. It's much more achievable for companies, and it lets them message to their leadership and executives that we're not going to get to 100% replacement anytime soon. And I think that will be much more rewarding. It sets reasonable targets, reasonable objectives. It lets your IT leadership pick and choose the projects that have the highest ROI for this and are worth the biggest investment. It also lets you build the skills that you need to do this type of work to pay down the debt that you've accumulated, the operational debt of relying too much on one vendor, and putting in the systems that make that replacement. So definitely we want to really encourage people to do an inventory. We actually wrote a workbook that defines criteria and key measures that companies can use to score different application sets, different work groups inside their company, and identify which ones are best targets for first migration. So this is something you can do very consistently. You can do it in a very ordered basis. You can use a lot of logic for this if you want, to identify which targets are best for a replacement, and then pursue an aggressive but realistic migration strategy.
And while yes, it's good to have a right migration strategy, but can you also share some advice on how organizations can avoid a similar situation next time? I hope there won't be a next time similar to this one, but still, every such incident becomes a learning lesson.
What you can do to prevent this type of trap, and because we see this not just in virtualization layers, but in containerization models, right, where we have dominant vendors. We definitely see it in hardware choices or networking choices, operating system choices. What you really need to be looking at is not what you're using, but how you're building processes around that consumption and making sure that you've built consistent pipelines to automate use of resources. And then in those pipelines, they must have abstraction layers that allow you to swap out between different vendors. This is a core philosophy for how we build digital rebar at RackN. As we build out an automation framework, what we do is we look for places where you can put in abstraction points, and then that abstraction point allows you to substitute in Dell, HP, Lenovo, Supermicro, Cisco, right? It doesn't, each vendor is unique, but what you have to do with that infrastructure is pretty generic. We have the same capabilities between VMware, Nutanix, Proxmox, KubeVirt, Zen, whatever cloud provider that you want to name. They're different, but you can build pipelines that treat them in a consistent, repeatable way and then abstract out those differences. It takes a little bit more work to do that, but it gives you the future proofing and the flexibility to do it. And I'll tell you something, when we talk to enterprises, inside of their company, their teams are already asking for heterogeneity. They're already asking for ways that they can adjust these choices so that they're not locked into the way IT approves of, right? And we all know this, platform engineering has to be flexible, has to offer alternatives, and you want to be able to allow those alternatives into the system. That doesn't mean you have to say yes to everything. That's not what we're suggesting here. But it does mean that if somebody comes up with a reasonable alternative, you need to be able to let them run that alternative. In some cases, you can pull it back and mainline it in some, to your preferred standards. In some cases, that new alternative becomes a preferred option, and that is reasonable too. That's what innovation looks like. And it's important for people to understand it. It starts in small variations in process, and the processes that can accommodate those small variations are ones that are resilient, robust. That's what we're talking about building. The ones that can't end up, being stuck paying a lot of extra money for VMware, frankly.
As companies, whether they are looking at migrating or alternative, or a lot of greenfield deployment, who are looking at avoiding these mistakes, where does RackN enter the picture? How do you folks help folks, whether they are looking at alternatives or they are building something new?
So we spend a lot of time and effort to make sure that we are open multi-vendor platform. And so what we've been doing to help the market in this case is we've been investing the time to standardize deployments of these VMware alternatives. And it's worth noting, we have, I think, very defensively the best VMware build and deploy automation anywhere available. Whether it's secure, automated, highly, very fast, large-scale VMware deployments, we are really well known for doing that at incredible scale. We have customers doing VMware deployments at remarkable global scale. And what we've done is that same automation, the same pipelines, we have built pipeline alternatives that allow you to swap in and do other virtualization systems, right? Drop in a Nutanix, drop in a Proxmox, build those systems up, do a very simple, just bare metal, so you don't even need virtualization at all. We have customers pursuing all of these alternatives. Zen NG is another example of platforms that our customers are deploying, in which they are able to say, I want to take this infrastructure and turn it into another platform. And the nice thing about doing that work is once they've done that work, they can keep doing that. So they might decide that Nutanix is the right choice for this infrastructure. They can actually turn it into a Proxmox infrastructure if they wanted to, and back to Nutanix, back to VMware. They can make those changes and alterations as they go. There is a point that you raise. There are architectural differences between what you would buy for the different types of infrastructure. And so we do see people who have really invested in the VMware architecture with externalized storage are not as well equipped to just convert that infrastructure into another platform. And so, we do help customers look at the infrastructure they're picking, help make some buy decisions about what type of platforms and vendors and mix of storage, drive, and network that they would consider, so that they can have some more flexibility when they actually go to those deployments. There is one advantage here in that some of these virtualization platforms have a lot of overlap with what you would build for a Kubernetes or a containerized infrastructure. And so what we do see is that sort of generalized infrastructure is actually very usable once you've broken out of the VMware architecture pattern.
Looking at how the industry, the market is reacting to the changes that are being made to VMware after the Broadcom acquisition, do you see that Broadcom is paying heed to what market is saying? Do you see any change, or you see that they are doubling down? I just want to, of course, we don't have their representative, but I want to hear because you're part of the ecosystem as well.
I haven't yet. I do hear rumblings that they're feeling the consequences of what their actions are, and they're hearing it from their customers for it. But I haven't yet seen any real adjustments into what their strategy is. And so I don't think customers should plan that Broadcom's going to have a course reversal at the moment. And I'll tell you frankly, even if Broadcom does have a course rehearsal, everything we've talked about here is actually good IT practice, right? You need to be prepared for using the appropriate platform, having better abstractions, improving your ability to have a multi-vendor infrastructure. Those are all things that when we talk to customers about it, the savings rack up into hundreds of millions, and some of our customers billions of dollars saved by being able to have a multi-vendor system. And if you don't do that, you're really making your overall IT infrastructure more brittle and expensive. So yeah, even if Broadcom has a change of heart and puts everything back to the way it was, I'm hoping that customers that we're seeing, we're having great conversations about them really improving their process and infrastructure posture and making it more resilient and open. And I would expect that trend line to continue because it's a really important change in market. And at the same time, I do think that there is a big hole left over by the Broadcom change here, and that a lot of companies are looking for who and how they're going to fill those holes. Some of that, RackN is certainly happy to step in with integrated automation and orchestration. In a lot of cases, who those vendors are and what those pieces are going to be, it's going to be back to the infrastructure owners, your own IT leadership, to fill in what those gaps are and some of those expertise. Some of that's going to be best of breed, and that's probably the right choice.
How big is that gap? And as you said, we'll see, but are you see that alternative can be technology based, but we all know that technology doesn't solve we need somebody standing behind that technology as well, a vendor to back that. How are seeing things developing, progressing at that end?
The gap is actually very large. The customers that we have really depended on VMware, and the VMware, the UI, the tooling, the orchestration pieces, their automation components. They had a lot of people trained to use the VMware tools to do the work of maintaining the infrastructure. And so what we're seeing is, they're looking up saying, well, wait a minute, I can't use these VMware tools to the extent to run all my infrastructure. And they definitely can't if they're going to be adding other vendors and changing other, putting in other things like a Kubernetes control plane or another virtualization choice. Those VMware tools aren't going to work anymore. And so, companies have to figure out how they are building, delivering, managing, monitoring all of their infrastructure. And a lot of that was being done inside the VMware suite. It's why Broadcom was confident that they could bundle them all together into a coherent product and then have every customer use that. My experience has been that not all customers want to use 100% of the VMware tool suite, and they'll pick and choose, but they are all using different components of that VMware tool suite. And so for them to establish a multi-vendor footprint or remove VMware, they're going to have to remove not just the virtualization layer, which I think a lot of people expect. They only think of this as a virtualization layer change. They have to remove their storage technologies, their backup technologies, their networking technologies, their orchestration technologies, some of their automation control planes, the image building tools they have, right? There's a long list of tool chains that we have built around VMware. And so companies are going to have to find alternatives for those tool chains in the process. And there is no company that has all of those pieces, right? RackN's working with Red Hat And we see Red Hat has some very interesting technology around OpenShift and Ansible automation platform that definitely help with these pieces. A lot of our customers already had those components in their IT mix, but they don't complete the picture, right? They leave things as a gap. They have components where you still have to do the work, or you have to replace things that were built into VMware. And that's part of the story with this. And we help customers make those choices. We know what best practices are. We have a certain amount of that built into our platform. And at the same time, we also, can talk through what great looks like, what best practices look like. What I would suggest is, no matter what choices you make sure that you're building and wiring in the automation as you go. Look at these opportunities as system integration opportunities, and then that'll help shape how these technologies get built, and it'll keep you from being locked in.
As you're saying that there is too much dependencies on a lot of the VMware technologies, the whole ecosystem. Should, once again, as companies plan their strategy, they should also keep this. I mean, we have talked about vendor locking, just don't put all your eggs in the same basket for so many times. But when we build things, we don't really care that much about it because we trust those vendors. We sometimes love those vendors, those brands, those companies. But going back to the point of that, what would be your advice when companies are building, once again, their applications in front? It's quite tempting, because if you're getting great solutions, why not, from the same vendor? But it's still
one of the challenges that we see all the time, and I've seen all through my career, going back in IT and infrastructure for a long time. It's very tempting to build something bespoke by hand to get started while you're learning. And so the challenge that we have is that very often that first attempt of building something ends up being the thing that gets deployed. You don't invest after it's working in making things go. And so what I really encourage people to do is make sure that when you're starting your build process, you're doing it in an automated way. You're always adding the automation and doing the lift to make sure that you can recreate the environments, that you can test something and then tear it down and rebuild it, and test and rebuild. It's a very developer mindset from an ops perspective, but a dev test prod pipeline. This is something that RackN helps our customers build out of the box. It's foundational to how digital rebar is designed to be used, is to be able to build, tear down, test, repeat, take that working code and then move it into a test environment and validate it and then move it into production, and version control all of your infrastructure and automation. That philosophy, when it's used by our customers, is an amazing, it's a game-changing ROI for how and they manage their infrastructure, how they scale their infrastructure, how they make it robust and secure. I mean, the value of starting from that approach and staying in that approach is amazing. You have to do that. If you haven't done it before, it helps to have a partner like RackN to show you how to set those patterns up and build them into your DNA. But it's absolutely critical. And so, people really need to look at this whole process as a chance to be doing this very strong, what I look at as a pipeline of automation, to make sure that they start doing the pipelining, the building, the immutable builds right from the start, make those core technology pieces. The nice thing is, out of the box, Digital Rebar has all those pieces. So we really help customers kickstart those processes. And then all I can tell people listening is the ROI that we've demonstrated for customers who are able to use processes like that is tremendous. It transforms how they use infrastructure, how they pick vendors, how they make deployment choices, how they secure their infrastructure. It really is a transformative approach to building infrastructure. And, I'm hoping people will use this as an opportunity to start learning that process. It's just like removing VMware from your infrastructure. You don't have to go 100% in changing out how things go, but you have to start somewhere. So this idea of always having a mutable process, a pipeline process to build and deploy your infrastructure and your infrastructure assets really does have that transformational effect And it just starts with one project.
Rob, once again, thank you so much for taking time out today and discussing this topic today. And as usual, I look forward to having you again on the show. Thank you.
Swap, I'm looking forward to it. 10 years from now, we'll be doing our 20-year anniversary.